Hello, my name is Abraham Klein.
And my name's Caleb Williams.
And we are still wearing the same clothes as the last episode because we recorded them both on the same day.
Yep.
So, the last episode we were talking about a program that was streamed on Max, HBO Max. I still want to call it HBO Max, because that's what it was for the longest time. And the program was called Let Us Pray, a Ministry of Scandals, and it's talking about abuse that has happened in the independent fundamental Baptist movement. And last time, we were talking particularly about some of the opening stuff that they talked about.
Yes.
And we talked about one story in particular.
The first case with Ruthie Hyler.
Ruthie Hyler, yeah. And what all happened with her. And how that, again, we don't want to, how do I say it? How it could have been avoided. Not say that she could have avoided it.
We don't want to take away from these victims in any sense of that.
No, absolutely. Because obviously she was a child. There was no way she had anything.
We're merely pointing out the way that their church's culture failed them.
Right, exactly. And again, last time we found the first thing that they failed to do was allow for proper chaperones.
Yes.
The idea that one child, that one adult is allowed to be with a child, I mean, any child, but let alone a little girl. And I get it. Yeah, you don't expect a child predator to be in your church. But at the same time, you can't take any chances, right? You don't let your children just be alone with an adult for extended periods of time.
Yes.
In fact, one thing I didn't bring out in the last episode was the fact I used to work for a secular organization, right? Evergreen After School Clubs was the name of it. And we had certain rules that we had to abide by. I mean, obviously there was some of them like, you never hit a child, which, I mean, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. But also, like, if a child needed something and we had to be with them, we had to make sure we were in a public area. If a child had to go into a room to get something, I would have to wait outside while they got it. Mm-hmm. If they needed something, help, they didn't necessarily explain it in the book, I would tell the child to stand out there and I would go in and look for them or stuff like that, because you do not want to be in a position where you are alone in the child, because number one, they could accuse you of anything. Mm-hmm. Which is why when I was a school bus driver, we had cameras and things like that. And secondly, if there is a possibility that a person is like that, you do not want that kind of stuff going on in your organization. Right. And so we had rules set in place that would obviously protect the child, but also protect the person who was working there. And sadly, there was not a lot of that in the churches that we are talking about here.
And perhaps they were just naive, maybe.
Perhaps.
But
it's
a big perhaps.
That is a huge perhaps. But in this particular one, we talked about Kathy Hyler and how that she was, not Kathy, Ruthie Hyler, and how that her youth pastor, Aaron Willand,
it was her teacher.
Teacher,
school teacher. Christian school teacher.
Yeah, and the things that he did with her, essentially
molested her and her sister and another girl, and then raped her.
Yeah, and horrible. Yeah. And the idea that, number one, they were alone, and then secondly, once it came to be known to the pastor at Grace Baptist Church in Gaylord, he just moved him off. Didn't call the police, didn't try to investigate. They just sent him away. Mm-hmm. Something that we've often blamed the Catholic Church for doing.
Yes.
And yet it's happening in independent Baptist churches. Yes. It's inexcusable. And the idea that that would happen is just absolutely crazy.
Yes.
It's absolutely crazy. So the first episode ends with a girl named Kathy Durbin. And she was a member at Faith Baptist Church in, I think it's Wildomar, Texas? Wildomar, California.
Yes.
And the pastor there was Bruce Goddard. Yeah. And it ends where she is riding, I believe, in a car with him, a van, and he had a little present for her. And inside there was a teddy bear, which was beautiful. It was this great bonding moment because he was being this father to her that she had never had. And Again, it's so heartbreaking when you think about it. It's disgusting.
He played on her emotions. In that way.
Yeah, and so he built this trust with her, and then he says, "There's another gift in there." And of course, that's how the episode closes because they got to leave you on a cliffhanger. We're not going to do that because obviously it's too early in the program to do that. But inside, and when they ended it, of course, your mind goes a million directions, and of course, we're not to try to put our mind in the gutter, but when you're watching something like this, automatically think, okay, what is this pervert going to put in there?
Yes.
What is this sick, twisted predator going to put in there? And it turns out it was a pair of underwear, or what is considered like, I guess they call it sexy underwear, like lingerie or something.
Yeah.
And that was the gift.
Yeah.
And after this happened, he would consistently ask her, "Are you wearing it?" When he would see her at the church or see her at the school or whatever, he would ask you, "Are you wearing the panties?" And again,
that's such a creep thing.
It is such a creep thing.
It's such like a red flag.
Oh, so horrible. And again, she's a child. So there's no way for this girl to just simply be like, "Wait a minute. I shouldn't be,
I think she was 12. I'm fairly certain she was 12.
No, she was 15.
She was 15. Okay.
She was 15, but again, still had a very troubled life.
Yes.
And a teenager who, again, she wasn't going to public school. She wasn't going to the places where this kind of stuff is normal.
Yeah.
She was in a sheltered environment. Now, again, their criticism is, well, if you don't let them live out in the world, they're never going to know when a predator's around them, which I get that. I understand because that then says, okay, purity culture, rape culture. I get their argument. At the same time, instead of just allowing them to see all the filth of the world, you instead keep them sheltered, but also teach them that there are certain things that adults should not do. There's certain things you should not be given. There's certain things that even the most important people in your life should not be talking with you about. Certain places, they should not touch you. That is the kind of education they should be getting. Not, all right, here's a book, and, wrong book. This is a book, and this is how to identify a male genitalia.
Yeah.
No, that's not the answer.
Yeah. They're essentially not telling them what poison looks like.
Right.
And then instead of teaching them, okay, this is what's going to hurt, this is what's going to harm you.
Right.
They just don't tell them, and then it ends up harming them.
And so I would admit that is a failure.
Yeah.
In many independent Baptist churches is that, yes, children need to understand it doesn't matter how nice a person is. It doesn't matter if they're the pastor, the youth pastor. It doesn't matter if they're anybody in the church. There are certain places they should not touch you. There are certain things they should never talk to you about.
Yeah.
And that's something I do believe needs to change in some respect. And again, I'm not a parent. I'm not here to.
Neither of us are.
Yeah, and so I'm not here to tell you how to raise your kids. But
there needs to be some form of teaching in that regard.
Especially for the most vulnerable, especially for those who don't have a father figure, which is unfortunately was an example in Ruthie Heiler's example and an example with Kathy Durbin.
In any of these
really,
scenarios.
Well, the one girl,
no,
her dad was in charge of that one home or something.
Yeah,
she had a father, but of course he was.
We'll get into that in another. That's a whole other can of worms.
Another can for sure.
But most of these poor ladies didn't have any father figure, which is absolutely sad.
Yeah.
The best way for you to help your children is not to hide things necessarily.
Well,
it is to teach them.
Right. And here's another thing. So then he also gave her a book.
Yeah.
I've never read this book, and I'm an independent Baptist, called The Act of Marriage.
The Act of Marriage.
He gave it to a child.
Yeah. I think it was during a babysitting.
When she was babysitting. And he gave her a book called The Act of Marriage. Which, by the way, if you're not familiar, acts of marriage are supposed to take place...
during marriage.
In marriage, yes, exactly. Not when you're a 15-year-old babysitter.
Yeah.
So, again, another red flag.
I think I have the Act of Marriage at home.
You think you do?
I think it's on one of our shelves.
Wow. Okay.
That's what they gave my mom. Or I don't know if my mom...
When she got married, right?
Yeah, I don't think...
Not when she was a 15-year-old babysitter.
Not when she was a child.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, I mean, the absolute depravity of these perverts, just, it doesn't bog your mind because that's just how sinful man acts. That's how they are. But at the same time, you're put in a position where you are supposed to be a servant of God. And yet you are, treating children in a way that is just absolutely beyond
I believe it says
understanding.
How does that verse go? Is better to have a millstone tied around your neck and be thrown
Than
into the sea
to offend one of these little. Oh yeah, there's a lot of millstones.
Yeah,
that
you kind of wish that this would happen.
Yes,
to
absolutely.
These people.
And the more you hear about it throughout this series, the more disgusted you become by it.
Yes.
And so it's crazy that this is going on. So then what happens? Okay, so then they go on to I want to mostly just talk about this girl in particular because it goes on and talks about the Hammond example, I believe. So then, Fox is then moved. Again, the same thing that happened over in Gaylord, Michigan.
Essentially it all comes out. Basically, she's brought into the church, or Paul Fox is brought into the pastor's office, and the pastor says, hey, this is terrible, but I will let you go, get all your stuff packed up, I'll rent the U-Haul, and you go.
We need to make this go away by you going away.
And he sends him to Jack Hyles' church.
That's right, he does send him, he sends him to Hammond.
And this pastor is actually more associated than the last one with Jack Hyles. He actually is more associated.
Exactly, and more associated. I think he was... I don't know if he served with Jack Hyles at one point or
I'm not quite
knew
sure.
him. Obviously, he knew him personally.
But essentially, this happens, and the victim is brought into the office and basically reamed over the coals.
Well, yeah, she's sitting in the sanctuary with, I believe it's Bill Goddard's wife.
Yes,
and is told, "How dare you?
You're the one who broke up the marriage.
You broke up a marriage and a family."
She was required to write a letter to his wife
and apologizing for
his
being
disgusting behavior.
She had to apologize for being R-worded.
Yeah. Yes. Which is disgusting.
Absolutely disgusting.
It's terrible.
It is terrible. And so, so then that happens. So again, I want this to be known. I don't care if you are a subscriber to this channel. All right? We don't need you as a subscriber. If you think that kind of stuff is okay, unsubscribe now.
Yeah.
All right? Because that behavior is not correct at all. And again, I grew up in church. Never once have I ever heard that a victim is somehow the bad guy when it comes to things like that. I mean, I will admit it was not brought up a lot because, first of all, we didn't have that kind of problem.
No.
When I was growing up in church.
We saw churches like this, and we said, well, we're not going to be like that. We're not going to do these things.
Right.
And we separate ourselves from them, and we kind of built a wall, if you would say.
Yeah, it does sort of cause a bit of isolation.
We cut the telephone wires between these groups.
Right.
We tried to disassociate ourselves because we knew things were weird, things were not right, and such like that.
Yeah. Now, Pastor Harvey, who just recently stepped down as our pastor, he was a very protective pastor.
Yes.
And some often thought he was a tyrant because of it.
Yes.
Because there were situations where people would come, and maybe these were well-meaning people, and maybe they weren't bad at all, but there would be people who would come to our church, and they would be a certain type of way, and he did not let them around us kids.
Yeah.
We were, as far as I can tell, very well protected.
Yeah.
And back in the day, it seemed like we were creating an island unto ourselves, but now it's like, well, guess what? I'm now 32 years old, and I can thankfully say that none of my Sunday school teachers, none of my youth leaders, my pastor didn't, none of the adults in my church ever even had an opportunity to do anything like that.
And all these things were, laughed at and mocked back then. And you look at these situations like, well, this is why we did these things. Right. This is why the people, in charge did this to keep us safe.
Our pastor, I remember Pastor mentioning from the pulpit before, he was mocked because he would not counsel alone with a married woman, or with any woman alone. He would never counsel alone.
Yeah.
And he was mocked because, oh, You must have a dirty mind. You must not be strong, must not be a strong man of God. And, to do that, well, apparently a lot of these other guys weren't either.
Yeah.
Because that's what happened to them. And I don't believe Pastor would have ever done anything with any of these, with anybody if he had counseled a woman privately. But you know what? We never got a chance to find out.
Yeah.
Because he kept himself from that. And unfortunately, this kind of stuff is happening. I don't know if it, again, I hope this is not currently happening in independent Baptist churches. I hope that if that is the culture, again, if that is the culture in your church, it needs to be completely eradicated. Mm-hmm. And so, then, so she had to write a apology. And then, what else happens? She gets another youth pastor.
Yes.
But I don't think he necessarily messes with her, but he ends up messing with other girls in the church.
Yes.
Who was another youth pastor.
This new youth pastor was her brother-in-law.
I think,
her sister's husband.
Yeah.
And in this case, he used the previous youth pastor, Paul Fox's story to kind of keep these girls in a set of submission and quiet. And where, listen, this is what happened to Paul Fox, and his family was just destroyed by this girl. Yeah. Telling everybody what they were doing and what happened. And you don't want to do that, do you?
You don't
want to destroy my marriage, do you?
Yeah, so, don't destroy my marriage. So, please let me molest you.
Yeah. And it was done to two different people.
Right.
Repeatedly.
Right. Yeah, in the same church. And unfortunately, why did they do it? Because they knew they'd get away with it.
And I don't think they never came out until recently. Until 2-3 years ago?
Something like that. I know it took a very long time.
And so this person was most likely serving in that church, and who knows how many other victims that this new youth pastor, is his name on there?
The youth, I'm trying to look for it here. Victor Montero.
Montero. Until Victor Montero, it came out. He was serving most likely in that church.
Yeah. Yeah, and apparently, again, this is their words, there was touching and groping, and sex was how to make him happy. Mm-hmm. Unbelievable.
It's terrible.
Absolutely unbelievable. And again, regardless of the intentions of this documentary, of this docuseries put out by the Preacher Boys, regardless of their intentions of why they did it, I think it's a very good thing that they did create it. Because the idea that this kind of culture has in the past existed and may very well even still exist in, I'm just going to say, it probably does exist in many independent Baptist churches, is disheartening at best, mm-hmm. and absolutely abominable at worst. There's really not even words to describe those kinds of things happening in God's church.
Yes.
Amongst his people. Now, again, a lot of these people that are coming out of this and are calling themselves survivors are trying to say that, number one, organized religion is bad, that independent Baptists are bad, and all these things.
That we're all connected.
That we're all connected somehow. And
not like there's a whole word independent in the independent fundamental Baptist.
Right. And so I understand that that's happened. Here's the thing. Again, I cannot relate to having gone through that. I'm thankful. All right. This is not a brag. This is not a I'm better than you. This is I'm thankful that I never went through that. And so I don't know how I would feel personally if I had been a victim of something like that. I don't know. Because, now I'm an adult. And obviously if I was put into a compromised situation, right, it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to let that dude near me, or whatever. I'm going to make sure to guard myself so I don't end up getting, into a bad position. But, when you're a teenager, you're not thinking logically. You're not thinking the same way. And when that happens to you, and then you get around people who have similar attitudes, who have then also been around people who have a negative view of Christianity in the first place, I don't blame them for the conclusions and things that they've made. Because again, I don't understand what they've been through. I don't agree with the conclusions they've made and the desires that they have to destroy the church. But I'm also not going to say that it's not understandable, right?
We understand where they're coming from.
I understand where they're coming from. And if I could say anything more, I mean, we're going to try to express this throughout the series. We want to be the advocates for those. And we'll talk about that when we get into another person, one who is the victim of David Hiles. I can't remember. Is this Amanda? Amanda Householder is the other one.
The next episode about the school.
Yeah. Sorry, that's her. But the one who was the victim of David Hiles, and how that she went to the church to try to get answers, and they turned her away. As an independent Baptist, I want to be able to say, look, these things were wrong, and we stand with you as a survivor of that abuse. Can we agree on that?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we've disagreed on that yet.
No.
And so I think that's something, again, this is a very small channel. I'm not expecting these women to actually see anything we put up. But I want that to be known, that there are independent Baptists who are still independent Baptists, who still go to independent Baptist churches, who are fully supportive of your healing.
Yes.
And want to see you live a fulfilled life in Christ.
Yes.
And so that's her story. I'm not sure how much more we can get into with that story, but yeah, that's pretty much the gist of what happened with Kathy Durbin. And so in the next episode, we're going to get into, I think the name of the episode is called The Quiet Room, and we'll deal with more with that. And yeah, so we want to thank you guys for watching. I'm Abraham Klein.
My name's Caleb Williams.
And you have a great day.